Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for the chance. I'm from group 3. My name is Marlia and I'm the first speaker. Today I'm going to present chapter 5 entitled Goals, Content and Sequencing by Nation and McAllister 2010. Well, the contents of this chapter. The first is guidelines for deciding or checking the content and sequencing of a course, goals and content, the units of progression in the course, and what will the progression be used for. Actually, there are other parts of this chapter, but it will be presented by the next speaker. So I just focus on these 4 parts. Goals, content, and sequencing. The aim of this part of the curriculum design process is to make a list of the items to teach in the order in which they will be taught. So when we design a curriculum or making a learning material, we have to make a list or items that will be taught to our students. Next, content and sequencing must take account of the environment in which the course will be used, the needs of the learners, and principles of teaching and learning. So if we make a content or sequencing of material that will be taught, we have to consider these 3 things. Well, let's have a look more detail about these 3 things in the next slide. Here are the guidelines for deciding or checking the content and sequencing of a course. There are 3 aspects. The first aspect is environment. In environment, we have to consider 3 things, such as learners, teachers, and situations. The content should consider the learners, such as the ideas in the course should help learning in the classroom. And the ideas in the course should suit the age of the learners. Next, the content should take account of what learners expect to see, and the sequencing of the content should allow for some learners being absent for some classes. So it means that if the students absent or cannot attend at the classroom, they will not miss the material because sometimes usually if we sort the content from the simple to complex, and if there is a student absent of the classroom, they will miss the material. So the content should consider the learners. And the second is teachers. The language in the course should be able to be modeled and comprehended by the teacher. For example, if the teacher make an expression, the teacher should be able to practice and pronounce it better. The third is the situation. The number of lessons in the course should suit the school term of year, for example, 1 semester or 16 meetings. And then the ideas in the course should increase the acceptability and usefulness of the course outside the classroom. For example, if we teach vocabulary for the students, then the vocabulary that we teach should be useful for the students' daily life. The second aspect is needs. Actually, this part had been explained by the presenter in the previous meetings. Here, needs consist of lacks, wants, and necessities. Well, in the first parts of needs, that is lacks, the content should suit the proficiency level of the learners. And the second, the content should take account of what learners want. And The third is necessities. The content should be what learners need. The third aspect is principles. The content should be based on relevant principles of those studied in previous chapter, in chapter 4. So the principles should be based on the research result. Next, the goals and content. The goals of language lessons can focus on one or more of the following, such as language, for example, vocabulary, structure, phonology, and functions. And the second is ideas. The third is skills, like reading, listening, writing, and something like that. And the last is text or discourse. This is a connected series of utterances, either spoken or written. A text, it can be a text or conversation. Next, the units of progression in the course. The units of progression in a course are the items that are used to grade the progress of the course. Here, the units of progression means the item that we teach in the course. For example, in a book, there is Unit 1 or Unit 2, and the content of these units called the units of progression. For example, if the starting point of a course was language items, and in particular vocabulary, the units of progression would be words. And at a broader level, word frequency levels, which are similar to those used in grading the levels of simplified graders. Next, the types of unit of progressions. There are two types of unit of progression. The first is those that progress in a definite series. Definite series means sequentially. For example, if the units of regression is vocabulary, so that will be sequence from chapter 1 to the next chapter. The more chapter learned by the students, the more vocabulary they master. And the second is those that represent a field of knowledge that could be covered in any order. So the second is not a series. For example, the unit of progression in a book, in chapter 1 is about daily activity, and the second chapter is about activity in the past, and the third chapter is about hopes in the future. These kinds is not based on language area, but based on topics like book in junior high school or senior high school. And what will the progression be used for? The first is to set the progression be used for okay. What will the progression be used for? The first is to set targets and paths to those targets. If you don't use the unit of progression, then so we don't have a set target. And the second is to check the adequacy of selection and ordering in a course. And the last, to monitor and report on learners' progress and achievement in the course. Let's talk about the units of progression from the starting point. If the starting point is vocabulary, then the type is series. Series means in if the vocabulary in chapter 1 is how to say, for example, the vocabulary that achieved by the students in chapter 2 should be should obviously the vocabulary in chapter 2 is more than the vocabulary that they achieve in previous chapter, like that. And the units of progression is words, while determinants of progression is frequency levels, like how many times they use the words and the occurrence in tasks. Next, if the starting point is grammar, then the types is series. The units of progression is grammatical construction, and the determinants of progression is frequency, acquisition, stage, and complexity. Well, the next slide will explain more detail about this unit of progressions. Well, the first is about vocabulary. There is considerable frequency-based research that provides clear indications of what vocabulary learners would gain most benefit from knowing. And this research shows strikingly the value of ensuring that learners have good control of the high-frequency vocabulary of the language. We have to, so in this case, we have to make sure that the students learn the vocabulary that are frequently used by them. And according to this book of Mason and McAllister, the first 100 words account for 75% of the successive words in a text, and the second 100 words account for 5% of the successive words in a text, and more than 500 academic words account for 10% of the successive words in an academic text. Okay, the second part is grammar. We have to use frequently use of grammar in teaching the students. Here, there are several frequency counts of verb from usage in English which can act as the basis for the selection and sequencing of items in a course by George in 1963, Jules in 1964, and Duskova and Arbanova in 1967. Here, there also a study conducted by George in 1963 that suggests that a reasonable basis for stage 1 of a course consists of 1,500 to 2,000 words over roughly 2 years of 5 periods of English per week, would consist of the following verbs. Next is functions. There is no standard list of language functions that is accompanied by the frequency data. Here, functions means the language expressions. For example, if we apologize, forgiving, those are the functions. Actually, there are many kinds of language functions, and there's no standard list of language functions that is accompanied by frequency data. Penn, A. and Alexander in 1980 organized under the 6 headings of imparting and seeking factual information, expressing and finding out intellectual attitudes, expressing and finding out emotional attitudes, expressing and finding out moral attitudes, getting things done or situations, and the last is socializing. Next is about discourse. Discourse as the basis for units of progression is more likely to be used in pre-university courses where learners systematically cover a range of relevant genres such as recounts, information reports, and arguments. And then attention to the elements of spoken discourse may occur early in language courses, but it's rarely the unit of progression per course. Well, I think that's enough for me. The next explanation will continue by the next speaker. Time is yours.
Ya, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I am Muhammad Iksan from Group 3. I'd like to continue the presentation of my group about the chapter 5 of the book that talks about goals, content, and sequencing. I'd like to continue the presentation of my teammate in the previous presentation about the units of progression. The other units of progression is skills, sub-skills, and strategies. As we know that some courses use skills and sub-skills as their units of progression. In reading comprehension course, for example, it may focus on skills such as finding the main idea, reading for detail, note-taking, skimming, reading for faster, and reading for inferences as the units of progression. So the success of a learner in the course is based on their mastery of the skills. Yeah. The next units of progression is ideas. A good language course not only develops the learner's control of the language, but also puts the learners in contact with ideas that help the learning of language and are still useful to the learners. Cook in 1983 suggested the ideas of the content can be about the imaginary happenings and also an academic subject and learner survival needs, interesting facts, and culture. The ideas content of the course helps learning in the classroom because several aspects or factors. For example, the ideas content makes the learners interested and motivated in their study of the language. The ideas content encourages normal language use. It makes learning easier because the ideas are already familiar to the learners. And also, the ideas content is familiar to the teacher and thus allows the teacher to work from a position of strength. Because they know the material, they know the content very well. The ideas of the content also of the course also can increase the acceptability and the usefulness of the course outside the classroom. It is because the ideas content helps in the learner's job, study, and living. The ideas content develops awareness of another culture and cultures. The ideas content maintains and supports the learner's own culture. It's also, the ideas content also helps learners develop intellectually by making them aware of important and challenging ideas. And so on. Now we move to the next, that is task-based syllabus. The shift to communicative language teaching that happens in 1970s emphasis on using language to convey a message get increased. And also, increasing attention was given to the use of tasks in the classroom. Because of the demand to be communicative in language use to convey a message. So the demand to the task given by the teachers or the instructors in the classroom are increasing as well. As we know that published experimentation with task-based syllabus was largely began with the work of Prabhu in 1987. And Baide et al. In 2001 defined a task as an activity which requires learners to use language with emphasis on meaning to attain an objective. In here, there are several characteristics suggested by Willis of a task. Willis gives the characteristic in question form. There are 6 questions. The first is, does the activity engage learner interest? Is there a primary focus on meaning? Is there an outcome? And so on. So, a good task, a task can be considered to be a good task in learners learning language learning is if the task cover those 6 characteristics. Yeah, yeah. In its development, task-based syllabus actually found some critiques. Yeah. The critique, for example, is the adoption of a task-based syllabus is usually argued on the basis of the inadequacy of other types of syllabus. Yeah. They focus on fluency at the expense of accuracy. So, task-based syllabus is mentioned to be only focus on fluency and expense the accuracy. But responding to these critics, some advocates argues that task can either be focused or unfocused on form. Yeah, so it is not awkward. Yeah. A focus task would target a particular language feature in meaning-based communication. Yeah. And also, opportunities to focus on language arise naturally during a task cycle. The teacher may highlight necessary vocabulary at the outset, and the learners may focus on the language used to convey their meaning during the task, and the teacher may close the cycle with a focus on form. Yeah, and now we come to the last part of my presentation, that is sequencing the content in a course. Yeah, to sequence the content in a course, there are 2 models that are commonly used. The first is linear development, and the second is a modular arrangement. Yeah. Linear development means the lesson depends on the learning that has occurred in previous lessons. So the course should be linear with the previous one. The previous one should be linear with the next one, and so on. And modular arrangement, in modular arrangement, each lesson is separate from the others. So the lesson can be done in any order and need not all be done. Yeah. The first type of linear approaches to sequencing is a spiral curriculum. Yeah. The best known advocate of spiral curriculum is Brunner in 1962. Yeah. Yeah. Developing a spiral curriculum involves deciding on the major items to cover. Yeah. So first we have to decide the major items to cover in the curriculum, and then covering them several times over a period of time at increasing levels of details. So we can see the picture. Yeah. So the bar is the major items, yeah, of the language, and the line is the learning activity that starts from the center and continue around like a spiral and covering all the major items of the content. Yeah. The next is matrix model. The main difference being that the change when meeting old material again is one of the diversity rather than complexity. In a matrix model, unit of progression is systematically varied against another, so that the same items are met with different contexts. One item can be studied in different contexts. Yeah. we can see in the table. Yeah. The next is revision units. Yeah, revision units are simply an addition to linear model. At certain points in the linear progression, time is spent revising previously met material. The relative amount of time given to revision should increase as the course progresses. Ideally, the revision activities should do more than just repeat previously met items or previously material, but should enrich them in some way. Yeah. The revision unit model also matches Bramfit's syllabus with holes. Yeah. The revision models can be seen in the table. Yeah. Yeah. It is meant by Bramfit's with syllabus with holes because uh, in its part of the curriculum, there's also a space for the old item, for the previous item. Yeah, for example, in the table, new, old, and new, old. So there are some holes in the each part. And then revision units, yeah. In the field approach, to the items to be covered are decided upon, and then the learners can start anywhere with the material and end anywhere as long as it is all covered. Yeah. A field approach to sequencing material involves deciding what items need to be covered, for example, make up the field, and providing a variety of opportunities to meet these items, and checking that each important item will be met sufficient times. The appropriate use of graded reading scheme is a field approach. By reading at least 5 books at the same level, all the new vocabulary introduced at that level should be met. Some of it several times. That vocabulary will be met again in higher levels. Yeah. The last is because in the previous one we talk about the linear model. Now we talk about a modular approach to sequencing. Yeah. Modular approach breaks a course into independent non-linear units. So different from the linear one in the previous discussion. So the content that are presented in the curriculum, covered in the curriculum, shouldn't be linear with the previous one, but they are independently separated. These units may be parts of lessons or groups of lessons. Each unit or module is complete in itself and does not usually assume knowledge of previous modules. Yeah, so they can be separated. In language courses, the language could be divided into modules in several ways. The modules could be skill-based with different modules for listening, speaking, reading, and writing, and sub-skills of these larger skills. The modules could be based on language functions or more broadly situations, such as shopping, travel, bank, and so on. Yeah, so that's all my presentation about chapter 5, continuing the presentation of my teammate in the previous presentation. Thank you for your listening. Ya, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The first, let me introduce my name. My name is Zulkifli Surahmat. And the second, thanks to the professor. And the third, thanks to the moderator, gave me the chance to discuss my presentation under the title Format and Presentation. The aim of this part of the curriculum design process is to choose the teaching and learning technique and design the lesson plan. What we are going to discuss about in this part, the first is deciding format guidelines, the second is following a set format, and the third, block and threads. What is format guidelines? What is following a set format? And what is block and threads? So we are going to discuss about it. In deciding format guidelines, we have to pay attention about the environment, needs, and principles. The first, we are going to talk about environment. In environment, there are learners' environment, there are teacher environment, and situation. In learner environment, we have to pay attention about the layout of content should attract the learners. The second, the learners should have the skills to do the activities. And the third, the activity should take account of whether the learners share the same first language. And the fourth, the activity should be suitable of around the level of proficiency in class. And the fifth, the activities should suit the size of the class, and the activity should fit the learning style of the learner. So we have to be aware about the student learning style. We have to see who are the students in visual learning style, who are the students in kinesthetic learning style, and who are the students in audiovisual learning style. We have to pay attention about the student learning style. And the second is about the teacher environment. The activity should be able to present, manage, and by the teacher. For example, the teacher should be able to organize the work group. So if the teacher take the activities, so the teacher have to be confident that, I'm going to take these activities. So the teacher have to be confident that I can manage this. The third is situation. The first is the course book should be easy to carry. So in this case, the teacher or curriculum designer, they can make e-module for the course book should be easy to carry, for example. And the next is the material in course of the course book should not be too expensive. For example, paperless, for example. And the next is the amount of the material in a lesson should suit the lack of class. And the next is, in deciding format guidelines, the next is the needs. What we are going to talk in needs, the first is lack. The learner should be able to successfully complete the activities. So we have to make sure that the learners can successfully complete the activities. And the next is wants. The activity should take account of what the learner expects to do in learning course. Many cases that the student didn't know the learning objective of the course. So the student have to know what is they going to do and what is they are going to achieve in the lesson. And the third is necessities. The kinds of the activities should be useful and the learners in the future. Use or the feature learning and language. Example, knowing how to rank and knowing how to negotiate. So the curriculum designer had to aware that and had to pay attention that the student needs. So the activities not only used in nowadays era, but also in the future. And the next, what we are going to talk in deciding format guidelines is the principles. There are 10 principles that we have to pay attention in deciding format guidelines. The first is motivation. As much as possible, the learner should be interested and excited about the learning, because if student didn't have motivation, the class will be stuck. And the next is the compressible input. There should be substantial quantities of the interesting compressible receptive activity in both listening and reading. And the next is the fluency, and we have to also aware about the output. The learner should be pushed to produce the language in both speaking, writing, over a range of the discourse. And the next principle is deliberate learning. The course should include language focus on sound system, spelling, vocabulary, grammar, and discourse areas. And the next is time on task. As much time as possible should be spent and focusing on second language. And the next is depth of processing. Learners should process the item to be learned as deeply, as thoughtfully as possible. And the next is integrative motivation. And the next is learning style, visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. And we have to pay attention with the student who involved with visual learning style, who are the student with auditory learning style, and who are the student with the kinesthetic learning style. And the next is the 10th principle is 4 strands, and we have to focus about 4 strands. The first is meaning focus input. The second is meaning focus output. And the third is focus language focus learning. And the fourth is fluency development. And the next is following a set format. When designing the format a lesson, curriculum designer need to consider environment, such as the lack of time available for each lesson, the teacher's skill and role in the lesson, and the size of typical class. For example, you have 16 minutes. You have 60 minutes to teach. So you have to following a set format. And this kind of the example following a set format. The first is listening input, usually with meaning focus, language focus, learning taking up points from the listening, and meaning focus output, mainly speaking of an involving pair group work, a game like the other activity. So this following a set format focus for 4 strands that what I have explained before. And the next is block and threads. What is block and what is threads means? The block is class time that is separate, somewhat self-contained. For example, listening time, conversation time, reading time. And the thread are activities that run through a series of lessons. For example, researching, note-taking, listening for the detail. For the example, listening time, that is the block. So we go For the threads, in the listening time, there is listening for the detail. And the next example is reading time. And in the reading time, there are several activities. For example, note taking and etc. This is we call threads means. So we have block and threads in for curriculum design to be aware about what is block and what is threads means. Okay, thank you for the chance given to me. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I am Sabrina Ratnasari Iswahyudi. In this occasion, I will present the material from Chapter 6. It's about format and presentation. The aim of this part of the curriculum design process is to choose the teaching and learning techniques. There are some points of this chapter, and I will explain the point of techniques and activities. A large variety of techniques and activities can be drawn on when designing lessons. This can be divided into 4 major types, and each type having its own cycle of activities, favor learning goals, and principles of learning. So, an activity, there are 4 activities in this topic. The first is experience activity, guided activity, share activity, and the last, an independent activity. So an activity can be a combination of 2 or more types. For example, a guided activity involving pair or group work, and sometimes 2 or more types are used in sequence, such as an experience activity before an independent activity. Let me explain about types of activities. The first is experience activities. Experience activities is try to keep as much as possible of the knowledge needed to perform the activity with the learner's previous experience. There are 3 ways of experience activities. The first is the teacher, curriculum designer, or materials writer carefully controls the language, ideas, and skills. So the teachers are already familiar with the learners. So the next ways, the knowledge needed to do the activity is provided through previous lessons. For example, speaking activities near the end of the lessons, or the listening activities at the beginning of lessons. So this result of these lessons can build activity that are the main point of the lessons. And the next is the teacher helps the learners to share and recall previous experience to make the following activity easy. So this result of in lesson format may begin with the teacher-led discussion or group work. For example, include discussion of a topic followed by each student's activity. The next activities is share activities. Share activities involve the learners achieving through group work for what they couldn't achieve by working alone. It means that the teacher helps students by completing part of tasks that the students cannot complete on their own. So, Nation 1989 describes 3 major kinds of group work. The first is each learner has a different piece of information essential to the completion of the task. The second, 1 or more learners have all the information that the others need. And the last, the learners share the same information, but each has a different task to do. So share activities is the second strategy in the scaffolding sequence. It is usually employed immediately after the modeling phase of lessons. The third activities is guided activities. It is when the teacher explains the material to the students and watch a teacher model how to solve the problems. It means students ask questions until they are able to understand them. The teacher turns over the task to the students. So independent activities, the learners work with no assistance or preparation.
It means that students do their own research and ask questions rather than relying the materials that their teacher or instructor hands them. They also take ownership of their educational path by stating their own goals of monitoring the progress. The next slide is table 6.4. This is teaching techniques for listening, speaking, reading, and writing that classified according to the type of task. The first is experience activities. For listening skills, the teacher can use listening to a graded reader, read aloud, and link skills. For speaking skills, the teacher can use the type of task of 432 as an answer, talking about a very familiar topic, prepare talks or reports. For reading skills, the teacher can use the type of test of reading a graded reader, easy extensive reading, repeat link skills or cards. For writing skill, the teacher can use types of tests of reading, discussing, and then writing, draw and write, or 10-minute writing. So for shared activity, the teacher can use the type of test of in listening, the teacher can use ranking shape story. For speaking skill, the teacher can use brainstorming. And for reading skill, the teacher can use pause, prompt, and praise. For writing, the teacher can use group composition, peer feedback, or writing with a secretary. The next activity guided, the teacher can use the type of test for listening skill is dictation or listening to the pitch, choose listening, listen and choose, or picture ordering. So for speaking skill, the teacher can use dictogloss or retelling or substation. And reading skill, the teacher can use type of test of comprehension question, intensive reading, true or false. And for writing skills, the teacher can use Blackboard, dictocom, or picture composition. So for independent activity, the teacher can use the task of reading and simplify. And for speaking skills, the teacher can use giving a talk, telling a joke. So for reading skill, the teacher can use reading subtitle, film, or to writing skills, the teacher can use writing a letter and writing an assignment. The next slide is about test and presentation. Test presentation is defined as an instructional event where the teacher communicates to the learners to what they are to do and how they are to do. So the next slide is about steps of task. There are 4 steps in this task. The first, decide on the main teaching techniques and activity. Yes, the teacher decide the main teaching and technique for their activities. So there are some active teaching. The first is visualization. For example, include using the interactive whiteboard to display photo, audio, clips, and video, as well as encouraging the students to get out of classroom or to do the experiments, and then plan the format of the lessons. The students in this stage, a lesson plan is the instructor route of what the students need to learn and how it will be done effectively during the class time. Before the teacher plan the lessons, the teacher will first they need to identify the learning objectives for the class meeting. And the next steps is check the format against principle. The lessons plan format consists of unit name, start time, and this makes easier for the teacher as well as students to remember the important details of the unit. So the last step is write the lessons. So the next slide, it's about task-based learning approach. There are 3 steps. The first step is pre-task. In this step, the teacher introduces the topic and gives the students clear instruction on what they have to do at the task stage. So the cycle, the teacher asks the students to make a small group, prepare their report, and then the report finding to the other small group to compare the result. And the last, language focus. The teacher gives explanation about language structure according to the material. So the next slides, it's about task-based language. There are 3 tests in this part. The first is pre-task. Pre-task, it is to prepare students to do the task that will be given. In this stage, the teacher can do framing. Framing, it means that gives the students idea of how the task is carried out and the output of this activity. So for during task, the teacher can set up option for student about how the task can be done. And the last is post-task. In this stage, a reflection on the tasks that have been done. The teacher and students need to identify the advantages or disadvantages of the activity process. So the teacher can provide feedback to students, and the students can give advice to the teachers about the obstacle they experience during the learning. Okay, I think that's all. Thank you for watching. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.